Hey there, and welcome back to the latest installment to our educational series. Today's video is going to be over interdisciplinary coordination of care. We're going to start off with going over why this is so important. There's three main reasons as to why interdisciplinary communications have become a larger issue in 2018. First off, home health agencies are being surveyed under the new conditions of participation. The new COPs came out in January of 2018. Medicare gave a 6-month buffer there for home health agencies to get these conditions incorporated. And as of July 2018, they're now being held to these standards. We're a few months removed from that. We've actually had a few home health agencies go through a survey, and so we're getting good feedback from Medicare, and we thought that this would be a good time to put together a video so that we can all get on the same page with how and when to document a interdisciplinary coordination of care. Secondly, more attention is being given to communication right now than, say, 10 years ago. A lot of advancements in technology. We're using embedded email systems inside of our software. There's a whole lot of applications out there that we can use from our phone to be able to communicate, whereas 10 years ago, the primary forms of communication were calling, texting, or faxing. And so we're coming to the conclusion that communicating now is easier and more seamless than it's ever been in the past. And so this is good for us. Thirdly, and more importantly, we've got a lot of home health agencies right now that are trying to figure out how they want to communicate these types of interdisciplinary communications. And what we want to avoid is having each home health agency come up with their own version or own standard for having these be accomplished. As a company, we're trying to lead from the front and have agencies adopt what we're using as a protocol to be able to get these done and inside the patient's chart. For all the therapists who want to know where this condition is labeled at, it's 484.75. The standard globally speaks to the responsibilities of skilled professionals. Skilled professionals must assume responsibility for, and then it lists out the 9 reasons here under 484.75. The very first one is ongoing interdisciplinary assessments of the patient. Just to kind of put things into context, when a surveyor comes out to visit a home health agency, they have their standards printed out and then they start pulling patients' charts. And they try to, after reviewing the patient's chart, they want to see where all of these different standards and conditions are being met when they're applicable. And so, as an example, if a patient had a fall, they would want to see where each discipline was communicated with regarding that fall, and that everybody had an opportunity to give their input using the interdisciplinary communication. And so that's an example. Later on in this video, we're going to go over 9 different scenarios as to what we consider to be elevated to the level of having an interdisciplinary COC. And so we'll go over those here shortly, but this is the actual condition that we're looking at, 484.75B1. So we've identified 9 different scenarios or events that would actually cause an interdisciplinary COC to be documented. But globally speaking, if the patient's outcomes or plan of care are going to be changed or altered in any way, or secondly, if a physician is going to be contacted or needs to be contacted, that probably would give you the inclination that an interdisciplinary COC needs to be documented. So we're going to run through these 9 reasons that we've identified. First off is change in the medications that impact a patient's outcomes. So if a patient goes to the doctor, they have a change in their medication, and then we find out about it. We're the first clinician to find out about it. We would need to document this to be able to let all the other disciplines know. In home health, if therapy is involved in the case, the chances of us going out more often than nursing is pretty common. And so we should recognize and understand that we more than likely will be the first clinician that would be made aware of these changes. Secondly, patients' falls, pretty cut and dry. If a patient falls, we need to do the COC. One thing to point out here is this is not pertaining to a fall that we witnessed. This is pertaining to a fall that would have happened, could be the day before, could have been 3 days prior. It's just when we're the first profession to be brought into the knowledge of the patient falling, we would document it this way. Abnormal vital signs affecting the patient's outcomes. Pretty cut and dry there. Compliance. If a patient's compliance is getting to the point where we're having missed visits and it appears that the patient's plan of care, outcomes, and goals are not going to be reached because of compliance, we need to document it. Evidence of abuse and neglect. A change in the plan of care. Sudden change in the patient's condition. So this would be a change in status. Medication side effects affecting patient outcomes. And we've got some listed here: diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, vision disturbances, confusion. If we are seeing any of these side effects of medication, we would document it in this type of communication. And then lastly, change in a caregiver. The change in the caregiver, put a little more context to that. If we do our evaluation and we're dealing with a primary caregiver, say the spouse, and they're there 24 hours a day taking care of the patient, and then mid-cert period, the caregiver changes, this is going to affect our implementation of the home exercise program and probably any education that we've performed to that point. And so this is going to alter potentially the patient's outcomes. So what now? Once we've identified that the issue that we're dealing with or the event that we're dealing with warrants a interdisciplinary COC, the first thing we want you to do is to call the home health agency and ask for one of two positions: case manager or clinical manager. It's really important that we don't convey this information to anyone else other than these two positions. If for some reason we give it to someone in the field staff, or if we give it to someone in clerical or in the office, there's a very good chance that they won't know what to do with this information. They won't document it correctly, and they probably won't let the physician know about it. And so we need to make sure that we're asking for one of these two positions when we call in to speak with the home health agency. After discussing the event, we want to go ahead and inform the case manager or clinical manager that we're going to be documenting an interdisciplinary COC, and it's important at this time that we get their name and title for future documentation. Thirdly, what we need you to do is contact the office and have our administrator or our scheduler schedule you a COC interdisciplinary task. And so we're going to take a look at that now inside of Kinzer. So I've got a task labeled here. This would have been after I've already called the office and they've scheduled it to me. When we open it up, this will all be pre-filled under a normal patient, primary diagnosis, secondary diagnosis, and the physician. Under the drop-down box, using a template, we're going to go and click on interdisciplinary COC. It's going to pre-fill titled for us. We actually don't need these. We can delete these asterisks right here. These are the same 9 events that we just previously discussed. You would pick the one that we're recording here. We've been asked by the agencies to do a little bit of double documenting here, and just to clarify that we are in the right patient's chart. So although the patient and the physician are labeled above, they want us to actually write the patient's name and doctor's name here. This is where we would document the case manager or clinical manager that we spoke with, and number 2. Number 3, the reason. It would be picked from one of these 9. 4, disciplines involved. In this situation, we can go one of 2 ways. If you know all the disciplines involved, we'd ask for you to use best practice and list them out here. If you're unsure of all the disciplines involved, you can state globally that you're communicating with all the disciplines involved in the plan of care. Interventions required, suggested. This, as an example, if we had a patient that we were documenting compliance on, what we would document here is that we spoke with the clinical manager. The patient's compliance has caused an issue or come to the point where the plan of care or outcomes are going to be altered, and maybe we're making a suggestion of doing an early discharge. And so what we discussed with the clinical manager would be documented in number 5. We're always going to have MD notified in this communication, and the reason why is whether we do it or the home health agency does it, somebody's going to be communicating with the doctor regarding this the COC. When you're discussing it with the clinical manager or case management, they will, between you and them, y'all will figure out who is going to be best fitted to call the physician. More than likely, home health agencies will be calling it in themselves, but sometimes they may think the situation warrants us as the clinician actually calling it in. Once it's completed, you sign it and date it just like you would a normal communication. This is a printable version of what it would look like. This is what would be sent to the doctor. And if we go back into the patient's chart, we can see how this would look underneath the schedule. A normal communication would be under the communication tab, but because we've had Kinzer create this as a task, we actually have it under the actual calendar itself, under the task that we would normally see, like an evaluation or a visit. And so, guys, lastly, what I want to point out is that these communications are really becoming the standard that we have to follow now. And so we have to be sure that as often as we can have it happen, we want starting off with these 9 events. There may be more down the road that we highlight, but for right now, if we have one of these 9 events that we discussed in this video happen, we need to make sure that we are filling out the COC. From a front office standpoint, we'll be looking and as we're QAing notes, we'll be doing our very best to identify these when they're not happening, and then we'll get it back with you and have you document it there. So with that, guys, we're going to wrap up here. This is my contact information. I've got my cell phone, email, and Voxer here. Feel free to reach out with any questions you may have, and look out for the next video. Thanks.